I never thought I would say this seriously, but after everything I found, I have no doubts. They were here before the Egyptians. And not just were, they left something. Stone structures that could not have been built in that era. Technologies that did not exist then. Symbols that no one can explain. And artifacts that disappear from museums too diligently. I will show you everything. Only real finds, only what really exists. And if you watch this to the end, you will no longer be able to look at Egypt the same way. I certainly can't. Hi friend, you are on the KirTop channel. 3 missing artifacts. When engineer Wayman Dixon descended into a narrow passageway inside the Great Pyramid in 1872, he hardly expected to stumble upon one of Egypt's strangest mysteries. From a deep ventilation shaft just a few inches wide, he pulled out 3 objects: a stone ball, a copper hook, and a piece of cedar wood. Everything was primitive in appearance, but that's what raised questions. Why were such things hidden in a hard-to-reach shaft? Who placed them there and how? These finds, later known as the Dixon relics, immediately became surrounded by myths. The stone was perfectly smooth, as if chiseled. The hook was oddly shaped, more like a tool than a relic. But the wooden fragment became the most mystical part of the story. After being transferred to Edinburgh, it disappeared, just vanished, for decades. Only in the 2020s was part of the wood accidentally discovered in a box among forgotten collections. Analysis showed an age of over 5,000 years, possibly older than the pyramid itself. Why is this hardly talked about? Why is no one rushing to explore it deeper? It seems that these 3 objects are the key. Not to the sarcophagus, but to something more ancient, more frightening, to a secret that the pyramid still hides from us. A person can't fit in there. Inside the Great Pyramid, there are strange passages that for decades were thought to be ventilation shafts. But the problem is that neither air nor humans have ever gotten through. These shafts start in the so-called Queen's Room and extend upward at an acute angle, resting against stone plugs with copper inserts. At first, they weren't even taken seriously, and then they sent a robot there. In 1993, engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink designed a mechanism that could get through. It crawled along the smooth walls as if the shaft had been specially polished. At the end of its path, the robot came across a stone slab with 2 pins that resembled door handles. It seemed that something was hidden behind it, but it was urgently recalled. Archaeologists remained silent. The Egyptian authorities did not give permission for a second attempt, and Gantenbrink was simply removed from the project. The second robot, launched later, made a tiny hole, and behind it was another chamber. It is unclear whether it was empty or whether no one wants to talk about what was found in it. These shafts could not have been used by anyone in life. They are too narrow, but they are ideal for storing something that should remain untouched. The Great Void above the Grand Gallery. In 2017, the world was shaken by the news that an unknown chamber was discovered inside the Great Pyramid using muon tomography. It is located directly above the Grand Gallery and is comparable in volume to it, about 30 meters long. This is not just a crack or a technical gap. This is a real empty space, perfectly integrated into the architecture. And the strangest thing is that it is completely isolated. No entrance, no exit, no access, no attempts to open it. Scientists from the Scan Pyramids project called this discovery the Great Void. They emphasize that they do not know what is inside. It could be a hidden room, a ritual space, a secret corridor. But something is holding back further research. More than 7 years have passed, and no one has drilled a wall, launched a drone, or revealed the secret. There is a version that there may be something inside that will change the idea of the time of construction, or the purpose of the pyramid itself, or authors who are much older than Egypt. It's a scary prospect. Because if the Great Void is a sealed capsule of knowledge, then everything we know about the pharaohs may just be the cover, and the text is still locked inside. The tomb that is not opened. Everyone knows about the Sphinx, but almost no one knows that there is probably a cavity underneath it, closed and even partially concreted. Back in the 1990s, geophysicist Thomas Dobecki conducted an acoustic sounding of the plateau. An anomaly was discovered under the front paws of the Sphinx, an empty chamber with clear rectangular edges. It could not be a natural formation. It was a room or a tomb or something else. This news blew up the world of alternative archaeology. The claims went even further. Supposedly, ancient Egyptian texts mentioned a certain Hall of Chronicles, a place where knowledge left by the gods before the flood is stored, and it could be located right there, under the Sphinx. One step, and we could open the door to the prehistoric past. But instead, there was silence. The Egyptian authorities did not give permission for excavations. The site was declared closed for research. Moreover, according to unconfirmed reports, the shaft at the bottom of the Sphinx was filled with concrete mixture. Just like that, no comment. Why is it not clear? Perhaps not because there is nothing there, but because they know exactly what is there. The Eye of Horus in the form of a diagram. Sometimes the secret is not hidden underground. It is on the surface, right before your eyes. If you look at the complex in Giza from above and then superimpose the image of the Eye of Horus, the ancient Egyptian symbol of all-seeing and supreme knowledge, the lines begin to coincide. The location of the pyramids, the Sphinx, the Queen's Room, the shafts, the Grand Gallery, everything forms a shape that is strangely reminiscent of this sacred sign. The center of the eye coincides with the place where the great emptiness is located, the tear with the descending corridor, the strokes with the shafts. Is this really a coincidence? The Eye of Horus in the Egyptian tradition is not just a symbol, it is a diagram of the universe. Its lobes are responsible for vision, hearing, taste, speech, touch, and thinking. And it is these 6 parts, with mathematical precision, that supposedly correspond to the structure of the corridors inside the pyramid. Moreover, it was not modern esotericists who first talked about this, but mathematicians and architects who seriously analyzed the internal structure. If we assume that the pyramid was not a tomb, but a repository of knowledge, it is possible that it is encoded as a giant 3-dimensional model. Desert tunnels leading to nowhere. There are places in Egypt where tourists are not allowed, not because it is dangerous, but because there are too many questions. One such area is located just south of the Giza complex. Under a layer of sand is a network of tunnels, filled in and forgotten, or filled in deliberately. For decades, locals have been talking about empty halls under the sand, where echoes, drafts, and even smells can be heard, as if there is air underground. But officially, there is nothing there, and everything that was accidentally discovered was quickly filled back in. In the 2010s, a group of researchers received a rare permit for ground-penetrating radar scanning, and they discovered long straight structures under the surface, possibly corridors, some with turns, length tens of meters, depth about 5. All of them ran strictly parallel to the main axis of the plateau. But as soon as the data got into the press, permission for further work was revoked. The cameras were removed and the sand was returned to its place. There are photos that show that some of the mines began in crevices among old ruins, stone slopes, steps that seemed to lead down, and all of this was roughly sealed with cement and brick. On one of these walls, someone left a word in English with a nail, silenced. No one knows who wrote it, but too many things indicate that Egypt is not what lies on the surface, but what is underneath it, and it is very important to someone that we do not go down there. The pyramid that wasn't built. If the Pyramid of Cheops had been built during the time of Cheops himself, we would have had inscriptions or images about it, or at least references in the sources. But nothing like that exists. Not a single hieroglyph inside the pyramid says who created it. Not a single scene of construction. No frescoes, no instructions, no thanks to the gods. Only empty walls and strange neatness. When researchers began to compare dates, something else became clear. The masonry technology in the Cheops pyramid is more accurate than that of the following pyramids built 100 years later. The stone blocks there are not just even, they are fitted with an error of less than a millimeter. Some weighing 60 tons are laid at a height of tens of meters, without glue, without traces of tools, but with architectural solutions that we cannot repeat even today. Neither a crane, nor an elevator, nor 10,000 slaves explain this. And then a theory appears. What if the pyramid was already there, and the pharaoh simply found it and appropriated it? Perhaps added a few things, but the foundation, the voids, the perfect orientation to the cardinal points, this is not from his time. This is from something more ancient, more precise, perhaps even non-human. Some scientists call this a structural anachronism. But in essence, this pyramid does not fit into the era or logic or history. Artifacts that are not shown. You will be surprised, but not all archaeological finds reach museum display cases. Some disappear even before official documentation. They are not written about in press releases, they are not shown on TV, they are not even included in scientific catalogs. They are either lost or hidden, sometimes by order from above, sometimes to avoid problems, and sometimes because no one wants to explain what it is. In one of the expeditions of the 1970s, which was accidentally mentioned by a former assistant of the Cairo Museum, they were talking about a copper disc that was found. On its surface, there were symbols that could not be compared with any known writing. The object was delivered to storage, and a month later, lost. Later, photographs were found. On them, the disc, and something similar to a map of the starry sky. Only not ours. There is also evidence that in the burials of the 5th dynasty, objects were found made of strange alloys that cannot be analyzed. One of the archaeologists who kept a copy of the report claimed, "This is not bronze, gold, or silver. Something else. Where they are now, no one knows." Someone will say that this is a myth, but then why is access to the storage of the Cairo Museum closed to most researchers? Why can't even Egyptian scientists get there without special permission? These objects could explain a lot, or call too much into question. Psychoactive vessels. In 2024, archaeologists discovered a vessel in the temple of the goddess Hathor, on the walls of which was depicted the smiling god Bes, the patron of dreams, childbirth, and, as it turned out, something much stranger. Traces of a substance were preserved inside the vessel. Its chemical analysis gave an unexpected result: a mixture of alcohol, honey, and psychoactive components, including those that cause strong visual hallucinations. In fact, it was an ancient psychotropic cocktail. What is even stranger is that the vessel was ritual. Its contents apparently were not used for pleasure, but for communication, perhaps with the gods, perhaps with the dead, or maybe with those whom the Egyptians themselves did not fully understand, but whose presence they felt. In the same complex, images of creatures with disproportionate bodies and eyes were found, too strange to be just allegories. It is believed that Egyptian priests used such mixtures to enter special states. During these rituals, they allegedly received knowledge that could not be conveyed in words. It was from such immersions that prophecies, geometric patterns, and architectural solutions emerged. What if the Great Pyramid is also the result of someone's revelation? The singing sarcophagi of the Serapeum. Under the sands of Saqqara lies a 300-meter-long gallery, the Serapeum. In its side, niches stand 40 granite boxes, each weighing over 60 tons. Egyptologists call them sarcophagi of the sacred Apis bulls, but inside they are almost empty, only rare remains of bones. But the main thing here is the acoustics. When acousticians from Massachusetts first turned on a low-frequency generator inside one of the boxes in 2019, the granite began to sing, a perfectly pure tone of 110 Hz, which coincides with the resonant frequency of the human chest. If you stand inside, the sound literally vibrates in the bones. Ancient priests could have used this to put themselves, and perhaps the bulls, into an altered state. But then why the half-meter-thick lids polished from the inside to a mirror? There is a hypothesis. The boxes were not tombs, but resonators that amplify the vibrations of the earth. Their polished inner surface reflected sound multiple times, creating standing waves. Some researchers suggest that the complex could have contained an entire sound organ, a system of chambers tuned to different frequencies. If so, the Serapeum is not a cemetery. It is an ancient laboratory of acoustic energy. God Bes. Bes is one of the strangest gods of ancient Egypt. Small, bearded, with a protruding tongue, sometimes with lion-like features or 4 arms. He is not like any of the other gods. He was not feared, but not fully understood either. His images are often found in places where a person was especially vulnerable, in bedrooms, at the head of beds, in maternity wards, and also next to vessels that, as it turns out, contain substances for altered states of consciousness. Some researchers consider Bes not a god, but a guardian, a guide between worlds. He did not allow unclean spirits to enter the human body during sleep or ritual, But that's not all. In the late Greco-Roman magical papyri, the name of Bes is found in spells related to astral projection. One of the texts says, "Call upon him, and he will lead you through the flame of the stars." Perhaps the ancient Egyptians really believed that it was possible to leave the body, to move and receive some information. Some texts call it light sleep, others, the second wind of the soul. Bes was believed to not only protect in this state, but also open the gates. In one image, Bes stands in the center of a circle surrounded by 7 creatures with elongated heads and large eyes. They are not Egyptians, and not gods from the pantheon. Unknown creatures. Sometimes archaeologists find images that they cannot explain. They are too strange even for mythology. In one of the temples in the Dendera region, on the remains of reliefs, figures were noticed that stand out from the usual pantheon. They have disproportionately long arms, large eyes, and heads resembling drops of water. They stand in a circle. Above them are symbols of stars, and in the center is a man with raised hands. The inscriptions are erased intentionally. This is not an isolated case. In other temples of Egypt, in Edfu, Abydos, on the walls of underground tombs, there are also figures that do not look like people, animals, or gods. Sometimes they are depicted standing on platforms framed by fire. Sometimes holding a sphere with rays similar to the sun, but clearly technical. One of the most mysterious reliefs, the so-called Dendera lamp, generally looks like something resembling a glass container with a cable from which a snake emerges. Pharaohs without DNA. It would seem to be the 21st century. We have sequencing technologies, laboratories, international teams of scientists. We can find out from a bone what a person ate, what he died of, and who his ancestors were. But there is a strange exception: Egypt. More precisely, Egyptian mummies. Since 2007, various laboratories have tried to decipher the DNA of the pharaohs. Some results were published, but almost immediately they disappeared, or were revised or questioned. Too much did not match. One of the most mysterious cases is Tutankhamun. His genetic analysis caused a storm of controversy. Officially, he was the son of Akhenaten, but the structure of his DNA, according to some experts, differs from the DNA of other mummies of the 18th dynasty. His haplogroup allegedly is closer to the peoples of Central Europe. Later, this information was refuted and stated that this was a mistake, but the original data was no longer published. The same story is with the mummies found in Luxor, in the area of the so-called Golden City. There, the analysis failed completely. The material is damaged, although the bodies themselves were perfectly preserved. Some independent researchers hint, among the mummies there are those whose DNA is not just abnormal, but unknown, not defined. Not a single genus, not a single species is included. But if even today, with a full laboratory, we cannot understand who was lying in the sarcophagus, maybe the problem is not in science, but in the fact that we are looking in the wrong place. Skulls of the wrong type. When archaeologists began systematically opening tombs in southern Egypt and Nubia at the beginning of the 20th century, they noticed something strange. Some of the skulls they found did not correspond to human anatomy. Yes, they had eye sockets, a jaw, a parietal part, but everything was abnormal. Elongated occiputs, disproportionately large brain cases, the absence of sutures that a normal skull should have. Some skulls were so elongated that they resembled cones, as if they had been artificially deformed, but no traces of artificial deformation were found. Later, in the 1950s and 60s, British and French anatomists began discussing these finds at closed conferences, but there were almost no official publications. Why? Perhaps because these skulls were found not only in Egypt. Similar shapes were found in Peru, Mexico, even in the Caucasus. Age, from 2,000 to 5,000 years. Different continents, different cultures, the same result. There is an opinion that elongated skulls are the result of special head bandaging in infancy. This was done, for example, by the Mayans, but in a number of Egyptian finds, the bone structure suggests the opposite. The shape was originally like this. And if this is not a disease, then it is a species. Another, not ours. Or ours, but forgotten. Some images in the temples even enhance this feeling. They show creatures with elongated heads in special headdresses, perhaps not to decorate, but to hide, or on the contrary, to mark. Because if these skulls are not a fake, not an accident, and not a deviation, then who did the Egyptians live with? Letters from the Future. In one of the temples of Abydos on the ceiling beam, there is a carving that still baffles even those who deny any conspiracy theories. There, next to the classical hieroglyphs, the outlines of a helicopter are clearly visible. Below is something that looks like a tank or a submarine, another object that resembles a drone with 4 blades. The shape, the details are too precise to be a coincidence. Official science claims that this is a palimpsest, the result of the fact that later priests carved new symbols over the old ones. Allegedly, part of the plaster crumbled over time, and the superimposed images created an optical illusion. But why then is this illusion so clear? Why were the figures complete? And most importantly, why do they look like 20th century technology and not abstract signs? And this is not an isolated case. The temples of Dendera and Edfu also contain images that are too technological for their era. The Dendera lamp is the most famous example, a giant glass bulb with conductive elements inside. Egyptologists say it is a symbol of the origin of life, and engineers say it is almost a diagram of a vacuum tube. Some inscriptions contain terms that have not yet been translated, not because they have been forgotten, but because their structure does not fit into known grammar. Egyptian artifacts in Antarctica. This story sounds like science fiction, but some sources, including reports from military expeditions during World War II, point to strange finds in the Queen Maud Land region of Antarctica. Among them are fragments of columns allegedly covered in hieroglyphs and the remains of stone structures resembling Egyptian capitals. None of this has been officially recognized, and all the objects have either disappeared or have been declared natural formations. But the question remains, where did this evidence come from? One theory suggests that in ancient times Antarctica was not covered in ice. The Piri Reis map, compiled in the 16th century, shows the outlines of the continent's coastline under the ice, with an accuracy that modern cartographers have only achieved with the help of satellites. How did a cartographer from the 1500s know this? And if he didn't know, who did he copy from? Some alternative researchers believe that civilizations could move between continents long before our understanding of migration. If Egypt really was part of a network spanning the Earth, then perhaps its traces can really be found in the most unexpected places, where no one is looking. One private report leaked online spoke of a fragment of an artifact found in an ice cave, metal, an unknown alloy, engravings, undeciphered symbols close to Egyptian. But the artifact disappeared, and all the participants of the expedition signed a non-disclosure agreement. Metals that should not exist. When we talk about ancient Egypt, bronze, copper, and gold come to mind, but some finds call this into question. In tombs that were long considered fully explored, objects made of alloys are sometimes found whose chemical composition does not match any known from that era. One such case occurred back in the 1990s. In a cache near the Pyramid of Unas, a small plate was found, presumably a decorative element of the sarcophagus. Its composition included zinc, nickel, and a tiny amount of aluminum. The problem is that aluminum began to be extracted en masse only in the 19th century. It is not found in pure form in nature, and high temperatures and electrolysis are needed to obtain it. Where did it come from in ancient Egypt? Another example is a cylindrical object similar to a tooltip found in the Sahara area. Analysis showed the presence of rare earth metals, which are difficult to extract even today. The object showed signs of wear, as if it had been used to drill or cut stone, not wood. There were others, rings, fragments of plates, internal parts of sarcophagi. In all cases, the composition is complex, and the technology for obtaining the alloy goes beyond ancient Egyptian metallurgy. But official reports on these finds were either not published or limited to the phrase, "The composition does not correspond to the era." Laser cutting. When you stand next to Egyptian megaliths, the first thing that strikes you is the scale. But if you look closely, it's not the size that's more surprising, but the precision. Some stone blocks, especially in the temples of Osiris in Abydos and in the underground galleries of the Serapeum, are processed with such precision that even a modern laser would be envious. Right angles, perfectly smooth surfaces, traces of round drills with the same pitch, as if they were cut out according to a template on a CNC machine. In Sahara, there are so-called boxes of pink granite, each weighing more than 70 tons. They are not just perfectly polished. Inside, they have a mirror surface and a 90-degree angle. Try to repeat this manually with copper tools. Even diamond discs today would not provide such a result without a long finishing. But this was done 4,000 years ago, or even more. Some blocks in Giza have both convex and concave surfaces. There is not a drop of mortar between them, but the gap is smaller than the blade's thickness. How were they processed if copper does not cut granite? What did the Egyptians cut with? There are hypotheses: vibration technologies, sonic cutting, unknown melting methods. They all sound like science fiction. But the surface of the stone itself is not fiction. It exists, and it is polished. Lost cities in the Sahara. In old satellite images of the Sahara, in areas where there seems to be nothing, strange shapes began to appear. Straight lines, squares, sometimes semicircles like the bases of domes. At first, scientists attributed this to geology, but when the shapes began to repeat, it became clear this was not nature. There are especially many of these phantom structures in the southwest of Egypt in the Gilf Kebir region, where today there is only sand. There could once have been entire settlements, and not Bedouin ones, stone, proportional, with the remains of walls from which you can even guess the street grid. Now these objects are buried. No one digs them up. Local tribes say it is better not to go there. They say that there are forgotten places there, left over from those who came before the sun. Tablets in garbage zones. There is a paradox in archaeology. The more incomprehensible the find, the higher the chance that it will simply be put aside or thrown away. In the area of Tel El Amarna during excavations, a flat clay slab was once found. The symbols on it did not resemble either hieroglyphs or Sumerian cuneiform. It fell into the category of unsorted material and then disappeared, like dozens of other similar finds. Sometimes such objects are found years later, in warehouses, in closed boxes, even in the trash near the excavations. Someone did not want to register, someone did not understand, and someone was simply scared. After all, some symbols on the tablets, according to witnesses, looked more like diagrams or formulas. What does not fit is thrown away. Such is the price of a convenient story. Cosmic alignment. You can forgive the ancients for their inaccuracy, you can explain their mistakes, but Egypt was right. The Great Pyramid is aligned to the cardinal points with a deviation of less than 0.05 degrees. This is more accurate than most modern buildings. To achieve such alignment, you need to do more than just know where north is. You need to take into account the Earth's precession, its axial wobble, which shifts the starry sky over the course of millennia. This means that in order to build the pyramid so accurately, the builders would have had to observe the stars for centuries, or have data that could not have been. But even stranger is the arrangement of the three main pyramids of Giza. They repeat the shape of the three stars of Orion's belt, not approximately, but with a precise reference to the era of 10,500 BC. It was then, according to astronomical models, that the constellation Orion occupied the same position above the horizon. The Egyptians called Orion Sahu, the body of Osiris, the god of the underworld. Coincidence? There is another mystery connected with this alignment. The pyramid is the center. The distance from it to the center of the Earth, between the North and South poles and between the East and West meridians, is minimal. This is the geographic axis of the planet. How was it determined? The scientific explanation is observation, trial and error, millennia of experience. The alternative is that someone already knew, and the pyramid is just a trace of their devices, or a landmark for those who were supposed to return. The map that no one printed. In the archives of one of the European libraries lost among the manuscripts of the 17th century, there is a map on which Egypt looks different. It is drawn by hand, with details, rivers, ridges, temples, but some things on it do not match. In the area of the modern desert, where according to the official version there was nothing, cities are indicated, with names, with streets, Some are in places where now there is only sand and rocky plateaus. When this map was first digitized, researchers thought that the author had simply made a mistake or made it up. But then satellite images showed that outlines similar to city forms are indeed there, under the sand. They are not visible from the ground, only from above. Who made this map? Where did he get data that even Napoleon did not have? One of the names on it coincides with the ancient Egyptian word meaning gate of return. Some are sure that this map is a copy of an even more ancient source, lost or hidden, and that means someone had information about Egypt that we will never see again. The Sphinx is older than we think. The Sphinx is one of the most recognizable symbols of Egypt. It is considered the younger brother of the pyramids carved during the time of Khafra around 2500 BC. But more and more researchers are convinced this is not so. The reason is in its body, or rather in the marks left on it. On the surface of the Sphinx, especially on the sides and back, you can see vertical furrows, deep, as if it was eaten away by water. Not wind, not sand, but water. The problem is that Giza has not had much rain, at least for the last 8,000 years. And according to the calculations of geologist Robert Schoch, such erosion could only occur in conditions of prolonged rainfall, which has not happened since the end of the last ice age. If Schoch is right, the Sphinx could be thousands of years older than the pyramids, maybe 10,000 years old. Or more. Maybe it stood here before the beginning of known history, and the pyramids appeared later, next to it, as a sign of respect or fear. It has strange proportions. Some suggest that the head was originally different, larger and not human, that it was remade later, erasing what was before. Perhaps the face of someone who they no longer wanted to remember or whose name they were afraid to pronounce. And if the Sphinx is really the remains of a civilization before Egypt, then our entire chronology collapses, because then Egypt is not the beginning, but only a continuation. Egypt and UFOs. Thousands of years ago, the Egyptians looked up at the sky, and according to the texts, they saw more than just stars. One of the papyri attributed to Pharaoh Thutmose III describes a strange incident. A disk of fire that appeared in the air, emitted light, stood still, and then rushed upward. This text, found in the temple archive, was long considered an allegory, until it was compared with modern descriptions of UFOs. On the walls of some tombs, you can see symbols that cannot be explained through mythology. Round objects with rays, figures hovering in the air, strange capsules over which priests bend. They are not the center of attention, but always somewhere nearby, as if they were part of everyday life, or fear. The Egyptians believed that knowledge came from the sky, not metaphorically, but literally. Thoth, the god of wisdom, descended in the form of an ibis, but many texts describe him as shining from a celestial boat. Osiris came on a beam. Even the term Neteru, which we translate as gods, literally means those who came. Coincidence? Or a memory of something that once happened? If at least some of this evidence is not fantasy, then perhaps Egypt was not an isolated civilization. It was a beacon for those who came from outside, or for those who were to return one day. We are used to thinking of Egypt as the beginning, but maybe it is the opposite, the end of something big, forgotten, gone under the layers of time. And if this is true, then everything we knew about history begins with those who were not even named. And everything we see today is only what they allowed us to find. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Bye everyone.